How did today's top CMOs actually get there? In this series, we explore the career journeys of marketing leaders, the pivotal moments, biggest failures, skills that mattered, and advice they wish they'd known earlier.
So if I see somebody do something the way that it was done in 2022, I pretty much call them a caveman. Technology is typically last. And so this time around, we're actually trying to solve the root cause, not the symptom.
Welcome to the Growth Dojo, the podcast for marketers who think differently. Hosted by me, Luke Cosley-White from DOJO AI. This show is your training ground for unconventional marketing tactics, honest agency conversations, and the real career journeys of top CMOs. Patrick Thompson built a company specifically to fix broken data. That company, Iteratively, was acquired by Amplitude in 2021, and it worked. The problem was real, the solution was solid, and the market proved it. But standing inside one of the world's biggest analytics platforms, Patrick saw something he couldn't unsee. Fixing the data layer just wasn't enough. The system underneath it itself was just too broken. Because here's what most GTM teams are doing right now. They're deploying AI on top of a CRM that hasn't been properly maintained since the last SDR quit 2 to 3 years ago. The records are stale, the fields are empty, the handoffs are guesswork, garbage in, garbage out. And this, as everyone knows, is the death toll in the age of AI. So I'm Luke Cosley-White, and this is Duarte Garrido. We are here from DOJO AI, and this is the Growth Dojo podcast. Today, Patrick and I get into why 30 years of CRM software still hasn't fixed the selling problem, how to clean up your data before you put AI anywhere near your pipeline, what the marketing to sales handoff actually looks like when the system does the data entry, and what a GTM team should look like in 3 years' time. If you work in RevOps, demand gen, or anywhere near the line between marketing and sales, this episode's for you. So let's get into it. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. Patrick, we're gonna jump straight into the questions. We're gonna jump back and forth between the three of us, so we see how it goes. We're gonna start with the CRM trap. So sellers supposedly spend over 70% of their time on non-selling activities. Where does that time actually go, and why haven't we been able to fix that in the last 30 years of CRM software?
Yeah, Luke, great question. It sounds like you must have our pitch deck, man. It's a lot of the pain points that you're touching on are the exact things that we went out to try to solve, right? So most of the time sellers spend doing things like account research, planning, kind of territory mapping, trying to figure out their way into an account, specifically more on the enterprise side, and not necessarily working with customers on revenue generating activities. Now, no seller, at least the best sellers, know that they have to do this kind of messy work in order to close the deal. But since AIs came out, not really anymore, right? You can use AI for high leverage for things like meeting prep, account research, automated follow-up. These are the things that we're trying to help automate for folks at Clarify, so they can spend more time working with their customers, less time just doing busy work that isn't necessarily generating revenue or helping them hit their quota. I think the one thing that I'd probably touch on as well is that go-to-market is a team sport, right? I think a lot of people kind of think of the AE as a lone wolf. And what we find the best organizations do that crush it are they have their marketing team working with their selling team, their post-sales team working with them as well. And what we found time and time again is that because there is no single system record, right? You have pre-sales in a different tool, you have post-sales in another tool. They're not really able to capture that entire customer journey and understand just what's going on with a particular account. When was the last time somebody talked to them? If you got handed off a new account from a previous AE, like what was the pain points that this customer had? Do you have a mutual introduction or a warm referral into that account? So we're trying to make it pretty transparent by trying to surface these insights as early as possible into the buyer journey and kind of bring the entire team along in one tool, kind of this consolidated customer platform for all teams within GTM.
I'm a big user of Clarify, and I can tell immediately that it's a CRM that's been built differently. Now, you come from a background of CDP, unlike I would assume most CRM founders that come from sales. Do you think that's given you an advantage in building a product in a way that
for sure? I mean, like we built a CDP to kind of solve the symptom within the go-to-market tech stack, right? We're solving a symptom, but not the root cause. So having spent over 5 years working on a CDP, basically about 2-3 years in, I felt like we built the wrong solution. And so this time around, we're actually trying to solve the root cause, not the symptom. And it looks a lot more like a CRM than it does a CDP, but Clarify has many of the CDP capabilities built into it, right? And for us, it's really that data layer that matters. Like if you think about how AI leverages data, if you have garbage data and you feed it into it, you're going to get garbage results out. So for us, like having spent a ton of time building a CDP, we realized that we really needed to build not just the infrastructure for capturing customer data, but also the line of business applications and also the unstructured data. So CDPs are primarily focused on things like time series data, user data, but not necessarily all of the unstructured data that you need to kind of power your go-to-market motion. So, we launch things like the integrated call recorder, we have access to all the email data, and that helps powers a lot of the AI and workflows that we have inside of Clarify. I think the biggest issue that most previous CRM companies had is that they were focused a lot on a thin slice of the problem, right? So if you think about all the tools that have come before us, you've had people that try to build the CRM into Gmail. You've had people that try to build a much better user experience, right? Or more flexible data model, but they weren't focused on how to design kind of that collaboration across discrete functions, right? So, one of the things that I liked from my time at Amplitude is learned from Pat Grady that you either solve for a particular persona, you own a workflow, or you build a platform. So we decided to build the platform from the beginning, which, I guess third time founder, there's a little bit of hubris that goes into that. There's a lot more work to build the platform than it is to build a point solution. But it took us a couple of years, I think, to get all the primitives that we need. But it means that we have people that are using us now, not just for kind of the sales motion, but kind of powering the post-sales activities too as well. And that means that, again, there's richer data that gets fed into the system for things like renewals and upsells. And it's something that, I think a lot of folks just don't understand is that go-to-market isn't just for the initial close. And I think that's where a lot of folks in the market are focusing on is just net new revenue versus kind of managing their existing book of business as well.
And it's funny because you're talking about the hubris of starting a platform when you're a third-time founder. We with us it was probably naivete more than hubris because we're first-time founders, and again we went straight into platform instead of point solution. So I feel the pain. Now you've said that data quality matters more in the age of AI than it ever has before. Can you walk us through in practice what that looks like? What happens when a team deploys AI on top of
we ran into this problem at Amplitude as well, right? And even in the Iteratively journey, right, we're focused a lot on capturing high quality data because it's the number one pain point we learned after talking to over 1,000 companies out there, right? We built a solution that directly solved their pain point. But what we ended up seeing is that, you end up, if you're on the marketing team, you send the wrong email at the wrong time to the wrong person because the CRM wasn't up to date or the sync to Marketo wasn't accurate. And if you're on the post-sales side, you don't understand, like, hey, you missed some customer health score, right? Like the customer health score is wrong because you weren't capturing things like usage data. Your Stripe integration broke, so you didn't see the subscription churn or subscription got canceled. There's all these types of use cases where kind of having that consolidated data layer matters. The reason that it matters in the age of AI is that we can do more work. We're effectively delegating a lot more work from humans, right, who can reason and think, to AI, who can also reason and think. Issues, I think they tend to have less guardrails. So if you just feed a dummy data, you're gonna get bad results. So this is where things like testability of agents, right? Like we spent a lot of time thinking about how to build this notion of self-improving agents, so that AI can kind of fact check the things that it's doing, the work that it's doing. And what I see a lot of people trying to do is, at least on top of existing systems, is they have to go through, this is typical for most large platforms, they have to go through and audit a lot of the data that they have, right? If you're using Salesforce today, you might have a decade worth of data in there, and a lot of it's noise, right? It's effectively noise in the age of AI. So you have to go through an expensive audit, figure out what's being used, what's not being used, how to clean it up, and then try to make use of it with agents. Whereas in Clarify, we're really trying to focus on like, hey, how do we make sure that we're capturing the right data? The data has lineage. if it does go stale, that kind of influences the model as well. I say we're not perfect there, but I think we're thinking about it from first principles, whereas I think a lot of the other platforms out there are kind of being a little bit more reactionary to it.
I really like the way you described it the other day. We were talking a little bit about how you see Clarify and how it should feel to use the product, which I think is maybe something that a lot more founders and a lot more companies should maybe look at. Definitely not looking at you, Salesforce, because it kind of you want it to feel like magic, right? I think what you said was the most valuable thing from the product is kind of the sensation that these are the things you no longer have to do. Like
Yeah.
these are the things that have just, been taken off your mental and cognitive load. And yeah, having used the product, and definitely not to hype the product at all, but it has been that kind of change, and it's also the way that we think about the product, right? We want to build something for the jobs to be done of an individual person, and not just build a tool that does a function, but actually that is genuinely helpful.
Yeah, I think
Um,
the best design products in my mind are those that just kind of blend into the background. Or it's the products that you don't think about. You don't have to think about all the decisions that were made that went into designing it. So with Clarify, right, we want it to feel simple. We want it to feel easy. When somebody uses it, we don't want them to have the sense that they have to learn another tool. And there's always room for improvement. I definitely don't think we've nailed it, but it's one of our core principles is this notion of like craftsmanship, right? Like raise the bar. We want to make sure that when we add a feature, it seems like that's the way that all these features should have always been designed, right? If we add a feature, it's not like we're just trying to bolt on something into the product. We're really trying to think about, okay, how does somebody think about lead generation? Like how should that work in this age of AI, right? How does somebody think about prospecting? How should this work in the age of AI? And there's times where I think we've definitely missed the mark, but all in all, we're trying to make it so that it's easy for a human, and then it's also easy for the agent, right? So when you build an agent to want to do things like automated prospecting, like it knows how to use the tools better than you, right? We give it a ton of information and knowledge about the best practices. It knows how to go orchestrate these kind of complex journeys, and because we're not just building tools for humans these days, right? We're also building it for agents. And so we've thought a lot about what that experience looks like, where then if I'm a human that I'm looking at this, it's more intuitive, right? So we try to match some of the mental models across AI, right? So we call things tools, right? It's easy. We have things like the core objects, which is more CRM primitives. And then we have agents that can kind of orchestrate between the two. And good design is seamless. It's hard to achieve. And I think there's only a semblance of people that will understand the amount of care that went into some of the things that we've had to build here, because it would have been just easier to just ship fast and kind of forget about that. But I don't think that's what makes a winning product. In the age of AI, taste matters a lot more now. And so we're spending a lot of time kind of perfecting and trying to make sure that what we ship is high quality.
Gordon and I discussed this as like when you're thinking about building a product that should be like wonderful to use. It's like making a really nice cooking knife. Both of us used to work in restaurants, so I think this is why we're drawn to this analogy. But like a lot of people aren't going to understand why you would spend, $2, $3, $4, $500 to buy a really good cooking knife.
Yeah.
But if it's the tool of your trade and you're going to use it every day, the difference in like the weight that it has and the feeling that it has and like the cuts that it's able to do, it changes everything. And I think that's kind of the way that I like to think about it in terms of usage.
Yeah. You also develop an emotional connection with those tools, right?
Exactly.
Like
exactly.
I think this is something that people don't understand, right? Is like the tools that you use kind of inform the work that you do, right? If you're stuck using Salesforce or whatever other CRM day in, day out, and you hate it, like that's going to impact the work that you do, right? Like, I spent a lot of time at Atlassian, and like, people like to hate on Jira, but like if you look at something like Linear, right, like that definitely informs the way that people think about the work that they do. Compared to using Jira, I'm a big fan of Atlassian, but like they're two very differently designed products. Now, it's funny, you mentioned chef knives, right? Like when I lived in Sydney, the only thing I brought back with me other than my clothes was my chef knives. It was the knives that I purchased there. They were Japanese knives. One, they were very, very expensive. But two, I had an emotional response because it like reminded me of all the meals that I prepared with them, right? Like, and that's something that's like, I still have these knives. They're downstairs. I use them every day. And I've had them now for close to a decade. And I think that's when we think about tools, it's like, how do you think about building a tool where somebody can elicit that same level of emotional response in what they're using, something that kind of brings joy and delight. And that's not typically how we think about enterprise SaaS. I think there are companies that have nailed that. I think Notion, Linear have nailed that. Slack, I think back in the day, kind of nailed that experience as well.
Let's get a little bit into that, kind of the other side of that, the messy side, the frustrations. Like let's put ourselves in the shoes of a RevOps lead, a demand gen manager who might be listening. Their CRM is a mess. They know it. Where do they start before they touch any AI? Where I feel like a lot of people are just like, oh, I'll just get an AI and then it'll be fine. Like, what are the things that they should be going into that are going to be wrong, that are going to be broken, that are going to make the biggest difference to them going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely not start with just going out another tool. I don't think that solves things. A lot of what we talk about is change management, right? So like, this depends on the size of the organization that you're in. If you're an enterprise, it's going to be very different than if you're mid-market, very different than if you're SMB. But think about, like, hey, what are the things that aren't working today organizationally? Like, document, like define the user journey, go do a bunch of contextual interviews with, let's assume you're RevOps, go do a bunch of contextual interviews with the folks that are using the tools that you own, right? Talk to the A's, talk to the BDR, SDRs if there's a team, talk to the marketing team, talk to the leadership, figure out like, hey, what's not working, or what's the truth on the ground floor? And then define kind of the problem space, right? So similar to building a company, you define the problem, then you define the solution, then you define the business model. So I think that this is very similar, even if you're an internal person on the operations team. So once you've defined the problem, then figure out like what are the different ways that you can solve it, right? And most of that's probably going to end up being kind of on people side, the process side. Technology is typically last, right? So it's like, yes, you have an existing investment in a potential CRM or your GTM stack, right? Like, don't just try to rip it out and think that you can put something else in that's just going to work better, right? Like, I wish that was the case. And like, we have companies that do this and like we help them do the full migration, but typically they're bought in on the problem side so much that they're like, they've done an evaluation, like they've looked at the competitive landscape and they've chosen to use a tool like Clarify. And I think the only way that Clarify is successful is if you think about it in the context of the process of the company, or like, how do we fit into that process and workflow? And then the people that are using it, are they bought in? The only times I think that we haven't been successful is you've had these, I'd say like non-early adopters, right? These laggards in these organizations who are just wedded to Salesforce. Like, they built their career on it, they love it, and they don't want to switch. And we might be in there for a year, and then it's always a question of like, okay, like somebody else comes in that is used to it. So you kind of have to paint that picture of like, hey, like we are a tool. Yes, we think we built a better tool for you, but the people in the process have to be bought into this way of working.
It's quite incredible how it always
100%.
goes back to people, doesn't it? I was just talking to my co-founder about that the other day, and it always circles back. Yes, we put a lot of focus in the product. Yes, of course, we put a lot of focus in the GTM motion, in the processes, in the workflows, in the automations. But in the end, once we really start digging in and trying to understand what moves the needle and why something hasn't worked or what is the blocker, it's always people. So yeah, and speaking of people, I find loads of really interesting overlays between what you're doing and what we're doing at DOJO. And one of them is the kind of the perspective of building an essentially a multiplayer AI tool, right? While most AI tools right now are single player and quite kind of they're almost suffocatingly single player, if I can put it like that. And you guys are building something different where the whole team benefits from using the same context, from using the same intelligence.
It's so funny because I talk about it a lot as well internally, because I don't think anybody's nailed the multiplayer AI use case yet. I don't think there's a single company. I think Notion's gotten probably the closest out of anybody, but then you're still building a fleet of your own personal agents. You're not building team agents, even within Notion, right? So I don't think anybody's nailed this. I think it's a lot easier to build a single player AI tool than it is to build a AI tool for teams, right? Like, we're talking like exponentially simpler. It's a challenge. You know, we've had to think about this from things like permissions and sharing and like all the core data access controls, right? Like, how much information does the AI have access to? Is it operating on a user scope, or is it operating on a team scope? Is it just another user within your system? And these are all questions that, unless you're building kind of multiplayer and or focus on things like collaboration across multiple different people, multiple different stakeholders, you don't really have to solve for. And, part of me envies the simplicity that some of these AI companies can do, just building kind of a productivity solution. But I think the real value is when I build an agent, like it can help and provide leverage to other people on my team, right? So, and I think there's still work for improvement for even us to be able to do that. But like I built an agent to help me reply to all my emails, right? Like it drafts all my follow-up. I have a meeting, I have an email follow-up waiting for me. It knows the thread ID, knows how to go grab the thread ID, knows how to write my tone of voice. It does all these things that, honestly give me 30 minutes at least, if not an hour back on a daily basis. Now it's the question, okay, how do I build that in a way? It's easier for me to go do that in any other third-party tool, right? Easy is relative, but yes, pretty easy. Now, how do I do that where if I go build this agent, I can deploy it to my entire team, right? So that they benefit from that. And that's not yet possible in whatever agent harness that people use today, regardless if it's one of the foundational model companies or it's another third-party product. So we've had to think about this deployment. How do you version agents, right? Like these are all the things that come into the complexity of actually building software. And this is the question of like, hey, people say, hey, software is dead. I'm like, you don't know what goes, 80% of the iceberg 80% of the iceberg you never see, right? 20% you might see, and the 20% might be easy enough to build, but the 80% is really, really hard. And this is the stuff that just requires some level of product expertise, product and engineering expertise out there. For us, collaboration is key, right? Like, yes, we have a lot of solo player people that use Clarify and love it, but when we work within a team context, right? Like if you have, and you all are one example of that, right? If you work within a team, you kind of want to have things like visibility on what other people are doing. You kind of want to see, like, if there's a customer email, you want to be able to access that. If there's a meeting recording, you want to be able to access that. And if there's an agent that somebody's building that's providing a ton of value or a skill that they created, how do you access that as well? And these are all, solvable problems, but I think to the depth of which we're trying to solve them haven't necessarily been solved well today.
What is the good process that people should be doing?
I mean, I think people, process, technology, and then if you were to add a fourth one would probably be trust, right? It's this like notion of like shared empathy, right? Like most people, like, I remember starting my career, right? I've worked mostly in EPD, right? Engineering, product, and design, right? Like, I think there's this misconceived notion of how, like, what a salesperson's job is and like the amount of effort that goes in. And same thing on the marketing side. And I've been fortunate enough to be kind of a bit of a generalist. So like first job, I was reporting to the VP of marketing, right? I've reported into the CPO, I've reported into the CRO at different companies, right? So like having that shared trust and understanding and just mutual respect for these functions is something that I'd say it's probably not often held across organizations, right? You typically have marketing throwing leads over to sales and being like, hey, here's all the qualified leads, and sales being like, no, none of these are qualified and none of them are converting to pipeline. And then you end up having kind of this eroding trust within organizations. And a bit of, it's kind of the Spider-Man meme of everyone pointing fingers at each other. And that also happens in post-sales. Like the sales team closes a deal and hands it off to the post-sales team, and they're like, our product doesn't do this yet, or like you oversold, and now it's on us to actually go deliver this, right? And it's the same thing between success and support. I think a lot of this is just mutual respect and trust kind of matters for building like a healthy organization. And like, again, like winning as a team. I guess one of the quotes that I took away from my time at Amplitude reporting this guy, Nate, who was the CRO, at the time was just like everyone's hand on the knife. It's like we win together, we lose together. I really kind of liked that mentality, the way he operated the go-to-market team. But yeah, I think CRMs aren't really designed for that, right? Like if you look at Salesforce's ecosystem today, you have something like Marketing Cloud and then you have Sales Cloud, right? And they don't really integrate well today, right?
It's not just Salesforce, everything there in one place where everyone can easily use it. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard part, right? I just think mutual trust and respect across marketing and sales goes a long way, right? And what I've seen, the atmosphere that I'm trying to promote even internally at Iteratively is like, we never really have a meeting without like marketing being present and sales being present, right? Because it's a go-to-market meeting.
That sounds crazy to some people, right? Like
I get it. Yeah.
It makes so much sense.
Yeah. And like marketing owns the story and the narrative, right? So it's like when we talk about like, hey, how do we message? Like, what are the pain points, right? Like, how do we think about competitive analysis? Like, what's the collateral that we're creating? Like, I lean on our marketing team for a lot of that. And they're really, really good at storytelling, right? And when we talked about, okay, like reps at bat, what feedback we're hearing from the field, like, we have multiple different AEs now on our team, right? So it's like their job is to give feedback back to marketing to make sure that like they have the information that they need to be successful as well. Like, what are the exceptions that we're hearing? Why are we winning? Why are we losing? If we're losing, like that feedback needs to go to the product organization, right? So that we can build the right product. So yeah, it's like we try to have mutual trust and respect. And I think, yeah, for whatever reason, every organization I've ever worked at, it just hasn't been that way. And I'm like, guys, we win together, we lose together. That's it.
I think that's kind of a mentality thing, right? That you also need to maybe even hire for. Like you need to consider that even before they join the company and be looking for people that have that in mind. You mentioned the other day you ask every GTM hire the same interview question. Sorry to spoil it.
Yeah.
We can cut this part afterwards
Yeah,
if you think it'll ruin your pipeline. But you asked, tell me how you use AI. What I wanted to understand is what's the worst answer you've ever got and what's the best answer you've ever got?
Yeah, I think there's, and we talked about this the other day. I think the worst answer is when I get kind of a superficial answer, right? Like they might use ChatGPT to answer some questions. They might use it for some kind of a bit of account research. They're effectively using it as a search engine, right? And like, prior to search engines existing, search engines were incredible. And I think like there's definitely cases where you can use AI just as a search engine. I think that's fine. But like what I'm looking for is how do people think about automating work that they typically would have to do manually. Right. So for me, the best folks, and like if you look at engineering, the corollary here with engineering is like engineers, the best engineers try to do the job once and then they automate it. Right. If I have to do something manually, like I only do that thing once and then I build an automation for it so I never have to do it again. I think that's the same for most teams these days, right? Like honestly, the ability to go build an agent and clarify can take you a couple minutes, right? So like if you have to do a job, automate it and continue to improve it and evangelize that way of working. And so when I interview anybody, whether or not it's an engineer or go to market, and I get a superficial answer on how they use AI, I tend to question like, hey, what do they do? Why do they do what they do? Right? Do they like this part of the job that they're afraid to automate it because they feel like they're going to take away something from them? Or are they really trying to focus on business outcomes and build kind of a generational company in that point where it's like, hey, we should probably automate this thing. We saw this maybe 6 months ago or so when the foundational models got so good that it was writing the vast majority of code for our team. And a lot of our team felt like lost. Like they felt lost. Like this thing that I was really good at, the AI is better at now, or can do at a fraction of the cost that a human can do. Right. Engineers are expensive, right? So it can do it much, much, much cheaper. And we saw some resistance. And I'd say, on the go-to-market side, there's things that people do that they probably get a ton of joy from that like AI can probably do better or at a fraction of the cost. So, for me, when I interview somebody, if they're not thinking that way, it just means that there's going to be a lot of resistance to the way that we work internally, because the way that we work internally is like we try to automate everything so that we can scale this organization with much, much less headcount than would traditionally be required for most teams. I think one of the metrics that a lot of people are talking about now, at least within Silicon Valley, is revenue per employee. And I said we definitely don't obsess over that, but like I think a lot about making sure that we build the right foundation so that we can scale. And if I interview somebody and they're not AI pilled, it's always a question mark, because their first inclination, instead of automating the work, is to go hire more people. And we're basically hiring our early team. We're 26 people now, probably going to be 33 in the next 6 weeks or so. If we hire people that aren't thinking about that early on, their default practice is going to be the practice that we have as we scale the business. And, we'll end up hiring a bunch of people and, when we could effectively kind of delegate a lot of that work to AI.
Yeah, I really liked the way you described it the other day as this Homo sapiens caveman comparison. I really like that. I mean, when I joined the company here, I was the 8th person, and I was the last hire for like 4 months or something like that. And then we hired another few people, and we're probably going to have tripled the team at the end of this year. But for what we're building and the pace and everything, we're hiring a very small amount of people. And what I like is that basically we get to the point where we're like, we could not scale this further without an additional person, rather than being like,
Yeah.
yeah, we could get an extra person. Like,
Yeah. I don't know if we talked about this the other day, but like my biggest indicator is just pain, right? Like how much pain is the team facing, right? And so like, like eventually we'll hire more people, but like I want it to be so painful that the only option, the only path forward, the only way forward is to hire another body. And at the point where we're like, okay, yes, it's so painful that we have to do this thing. And like, trust me, I feel more of the pain than I think a lot of people on our team, because I'm doing many, many different jobs, right? But I don't want to just like hire, like, I don't have an EA, right? Like,
17 executive assistants.
yeah, exactly. I don't have an EA. Like if I'm doing something that's taking away time, I build an agent for it. And this is the again, like I think that example has to come from the top down, right? It can't come, it's not bottoms up. And I probably am the biggest adopter of AI within the company, and because I'm trying to show what's possible now with it. And I think this is the hard part, where if you don't kind of hit this like AI mentality of like, hey, let me just go try it. Like I have this thing that has been bugging. Let me just go try doing it with AI, and it might not work, but like the models are getting better and better, and it will work eventually. So you kind of just have to rewire your brain into trying to think of delegating that work to AI. Now, it's funny you use the caveman analogy is my favorite analogy, right? Because if I see somebody do something the way that it was done in 2022, I pretty much call them a caveman, and it's a bit of a joke internally. But I'm like, hey, like you can automate that, or like you could use AI to do that. And I don't care if it's drafting a sales contract, or if it's triaging support tickets, right, or doing some analysis on a product feature that we just rolled out. But AI is really good at doing these things, and it's not perfect, again, and like there needs to be some level of cognition that humans apply to make sure that the results you're getting are good. But yeah, it's the caveman Homo sapien analogy is probably my favorite to use these days.
So if we're looking back at 2022 as the caveman era, if we're looking forward 2 years from now, like the Homo sapiens that will be, what do you think a GTM team is going to look like, and what kind of functions has AI actually absorbed by then?
Yeah, it's funny. I get a lot of people asking me the question like, "Hey, like, is AI going to take away sales jobs?" And I think it's the number one question I probably get from different folks. And for me, I think selling is human, right? Like we've been buying and selling things for as long as we've existed. And so for me, I don't think of what we're doing as taking away sales jobs. I think what we're doing is trying to provide sales teams superpowers, right? And that means that like I think ultimately, I think reps should have a much higher quota, right? I think their quota should be higher. They should be able to do a lot. As a company, should be able to do a lot more with less, because we're just automating as much of the busy work as possible. Now, if I think about 3-4 years now in GTM, I think you're going to have systems that are more proactive versus reactive. Right, so most software today there's still a human that's prompting it, even if it's AI, right? Like you're still prompting it to get some information. It's not a system that's pushing you insights. And I think that's where the real gap is, right? When you think about moving just from system of record to system of action to system of intelligence, right? When we think about system of intelligence, it's how do we make a system that understands your business better than you do, that can proactively surface the right, if your sales, the right leads at the right time, or if you're marketing, it can give you updates on how your ICP is evolving. It can give you better analysis on how your campaigns are performing, right? And like we're not good yet at building these intelligent systems. It's just there's not a ton of examples out there. So I think a couple of years from now, I think that's where AI can really provide a ton of leverage, which is this whole notion of one, providing and surfacing these insights, but then optimizing for them as well. Right. So, I talk a lot about building these like self-improving systems, right? A system that gets smarter the more you use it. And that's kind of our goal with Clarify is the more you use it, the more information we have, the more reps at bat your salespeople take, it's all feeding back into the system of intelligence that can kind of optimize that overall journey for you.
I'm excited for that. I have one last question that I ask everyone, Patrick, which is, The idea of the series is that it's the channels that marketers forgot, the areas that people think are too hard or think will take too much time or too much money. I'd love from your side, what do you think are some marketing channels or tactics which most people really struggle with that you'd love to hear about, that you think other people would like to hear about? And then if you have for those anyone who you think is just the absolute best at that area, that will be awesome. And then I'll invite them on.
That's great. I think so. Some of the channels that we spend a lot of time kind of optimizing for right now are things like AEO, GEO, right? We're spending some resources behind that, which I think probably every company is, but that seems to be working well. The other area that we're spending a lot of time is LinkedIn, right? So I think building founder brand it takes a lot of time, but like that's paid off dividends for us. I think some areas that, we struggle with is this whole notion of like social listening, which I think we need to get better at, and just community building. I think those are the areas of opportunity that we have as an organization, and something I keep on thinking about, but we just haven't made enough investment to. And I'm really keen to go kind of spend some cycles there.
So what are we going to go through in the episode today?
I mean, a lot of this is like just the lessons learned, having spent a lot of time building go-to-market tools across both CDPs and CRMs, specifically like what's changed in the age of AI. How do we think about team formation, investment in different areas, and how we think about building great product, and how that's going to evolve now from things like a lot of manual work that go-to-market teams do to these fully kind of self-driving systems that are kind of emerging now in the age of AI.
Patrick, this was awesome. Thank you so much for this. It was a lot of fun. It always is a lot of fun.
Bye, man.
If you have a guest in mind that you think we should be interviewing, please reach out to me on LinkedIn and let me know. If you have a topic you think we should be doing an episode about, please reach out on LinkedIn and let me know.